Hi, and welcome back. This is lecture 2 in our master series on exponential growth. I'm Sylvia Ceres, and our master today is Jennifer Vessels. Welcome back, Jennifer.
Thank you. Good to be here again.
So we're going to spend another 25 minutes or so talking about our second topic, which is 3 favorite examples of exponential growth. We talked a little bit about concepts in the previous lecture, the idea of this doubling style growth over the same periods of time in computing power, in access to data, and in network capacity. Mm-hmm. And now even with algorithms and AI, so that's the 4th component in a way. And we talked about how it's really important to think about a real world problem, a market failure that you can then solve in a completely new way through a combination of these 4, through something that we often refer to as a digital platform, which is really a connection of data with the users and all of this computation in between. And now you will tell us how these concepts relate to these examples that you believe are some of the best examples of exponential growth and platform services in the world. And if I understand correctly, you will talk about Airbnb and Uber, you will talk about Amazon, and you will talk about Adobe, correct?
Right. Correct. Three very different perspectives, but all succeeding dramatically based on indeed the platform with all of those combinations. And maybe a good one.
Sorry.
A good one maybe to start with would be Airbnb. And what I like about the Airbnb story is that it comes at things from 2 perspectives. The founders of Airbnb are Silicon Valley residents that just like everyone there has big risk takers, big try everything, started in various companies and learning to be entrepreneurs, found themselves in the financial crisis, in their own crisis of each being out of a job, having a very expensive apartment in San Francisco. And instead of going and asking people for loans and asking for handouts, they said, let's look at ourselves and what do we have available that we can maybe make money on? How can we commercialize what we have? And they looked around and said, the main thing we have right now is a very expensive apartment that is actually pretty nice, but we're going to not be able to pay our rent. So they got creative and said, you know, there are people that are still, even in this bad time, paying lots of money to rent hotel rooms just on the other side of the city. If somebody's paying $150 a night for a crappy hotel room, maybe they'd be willing to pay $50 a night to sleep here in our apartment. And so they thought, this sounds like a good idea. Let's talk to a few people. Within a week, they had 5 people that were signed up and ready to spend a week sleeping on their floor. And those 5 people were extremely happy. The Airbnb founders made sure that they had everything they needed. They talked to them every day. How can we make things better? By the time those 5 people left, they each talked to 5 to 100 people. Within a month, the Airbnb founders were running a very different type of business. They were leveraging a platform, which at that time was people talking to each other and talking to their friends and using the basic tools like Craigslist and beginning to use tools like Facebook to get the message out, building on that computing platform that was there, so that within a matter of a month, they were already up and running with a very viable new business model of renting space in not only their apartment, but also others' apartments in order to fill that inefficiency of quick, cheap, simple, personalized place to stay. So a good example, I believe, of start with the market need, look at what you have, talk to people, get started, just do it, and then leverage the platform and the technology to grow it.
I still think that, you know, it's a great idea. It's the disruption of the value chain really for hotels, because you can allow people to find accommodation. I have been using two of these platforms quite intensely myself this summer. We had to go to a vacation in northern Norway, and both finding accommodation, but also finding transportation. I used Airbnb for accommodation and Nabu, the Norwegian car sharing app for cars. And I think that the difficult thing here is then
Mm-hmm.
finding out the right user experience. I'm a very big fan now of Airbnb. It gives you a good user experience when you're looking for a place to stay. It makes you feel safe because you can check the host can check you. It allows you to meet new people. It is a very, very smooth user experience. It was probably a huge task to actually make this platform scale as it did, because I don't know how many hosts they have today, but we're talking in hundreds of millions of users of the platform. So there is the idea, but then there is also the ability to build a system that will accommodate exponential growth. I don't know if you want to say something about that.
I do, because there's two sides of that. You know, the platform, as we talked about previously, that is continuing to get faster and better in the algorithms and the software and the tools that can give you the data and the analytics and the knowledge to be able to constantly monitor behavior and to gain access to users. So that's there. But I think what Airbnb has done a great job of, as has in some cases Uber and a number of other of these platforms, is really being close to the customer. It's understanding the intricacies of what people want, defining what kind of person it is that you want to attract. Initially in the Airbnb world, it was very well defined. It was people between the age of 25 and 40 that were traveling, that wanted an experience, wanted to meet people, open mindset, typically individuals, could be professionals. So they very closely narrowed down what kind of person, and then monitored what does that person want and need, and appealed to them through all of the marketing, through the type of hosts that they would bring in, and also building that constant feedback system so that the host gets feedback as well as the user gets feedback, and people want to be part of that kind of community, of a real trusted environment. They've been very effective at using the software and the algorithms and the tools to support that user-centric experience. Kind of starts with thinking about the customer and the market first, and how can we leverage the platform instead of the other way around.
Excellent. Uber is a very similar story. I don't know if you would like to say something more about that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be learned from the Uber story, which did start, as I mentioned previously, from a recognition of an inefficiency, and definitely built very, very quickly on top of the capabilities. Very much focused on disrupting, if you will, the traditional taxi industry. I think where Uber has had some challenges is not being as close to their users as they could have been, not recognizing some of the challenges that they ran into with some of the societal issues, shall we say, and not recognizing the opportunity there was for others to build competitive solutions. So they started a revolution. They completely have disrupted and changed the way people operate compared to the prior ways of transport. But I think compared to Airbnb, they've not been as good at really monitoring the market and owning that user experience and getting that true loyalty, which has been what has hurt them against Lyft and some of the other options on a global basis.
I think it's really interesting also that, Uber has had a harder kind of social acceptance journey than Airbnb. It's really hard not to like Airbnb unless you are, Four Seasons or Hilton. And And when it comes to Uber, I mean, there are lots of taxi drivers that don't like them. There are people that talk about work politics that have a problem with them. So I think what's really important here is that if you're disrupting a very established value chain, you also have to be aware that this is going to be a social change, and you need to be you have to have a proactive attitude to the society and make sure that you don't create new problems by solving some old ones. And so I think we've seen a difference there between Uber and Airbnb. And I don't think we'll spend much more time on that, but we'll get back to that when we talk about Learn. So I'd like you to tell us a little bit about Amazon. I think that's probably the most interesting company in the world, or the way that Jeff Bezos has set up his whole leadership philosophy and his 9 leadership principles around long-term exponential growth. I think is the most disciplined exercise in transformation I've ever seen. What's your take on Amazon?
Yeah, I agree. They're a phenomenal case study, and in many ways they're honestly the opposite of an Airbnb and an Uber. An Airbnb and an Uber was recognizing a problem. Let's see what can happen, and let's try something. On the Amazon side, I mean, Jeff Bezos, going back to when he was a financial analyst on Wall Street, he had a vision. He had a very long-term strategic vision of changing the world around what he saw as a massive inefficiency, which is how we get access to what we need when we need it. And very strategically looked at, if that's what I'm going to achieve in life, change the way society accesses things, how do I get started with the most easy, most inefficient way to move forward? And recognize books was one of the best things that people around the world need access to, want access to, get passionate about. They're heavy, they're lunky, they're difficult. So let's start with logistics for books. So it was a very pointed approach from the very, very beginning, and built a phenomenal customer base, and very, very effectively used all aspects of platform, software, algorithms, very early utilization of machine learning and AI to understand how customers interfaced on that first product, and then began asking questions and adding in additional solutions, to the point where he had that first level of the garden starting to take off. The flowers were starting to bloom. People were coming back, and recognized we have to keep these folks. We've got to build in loyalty, and hence moved forward with Amazon Prime. That was a phenomenal decision to, in essence, lock people in based upon the one thing that was a concern to people in using Amazon, and that was shipping costs. So let's get people to pay $100 a year, and they don't have to pay shipping on anything. Brilliant idea. So that gave the customer loyalty. That also gave a lot more access to understanding how people operate. That gave that foundation. At some point, recognizing in order for us to really be effective, we need greater algorithms, greater AI, and in order for a machine to learn, it needs data. And so for us to really get the massive quantities of data and computing power within Amazon, we need a way to access significantly, exponentially higher amounts of data. And we need a way to store information ourselves in our peak periods of growth, such as around Christmas. Hence, launching Amazon Web Services. Let's build and run our own data centers to support our own company, but let's rent that out to other people, because others need access in small quantities to this huge exponential power called a platform. So let's rent that, giving us anonymized but access to data, capabilities, greater machine learning to support our core business, which is giving access to the right things at the right time. And that's really been a phenomenal success. I mean, today, the vision that he had many years ago of the place to go for anything you need whenever you need it, even before you know you need it, is very much the truth today. A great story.
Again, the problem seems clear and what shall I say, simple enough. But it's when you think about how he solves this for millions of salespeople or millions of small shops and his own warehouses and hundreds of millions of customers. It's in this scale that things get incredibly complex, and it should feel like a personalized experience for absolutely everyone. And what really fascinates me is I've been just reading this book called Working Backwards that I was very fascinated by. So it's two people who were in his very close leadership team that talked about the intention behind these leadership principles. And he has Jeff has this very long-term focus, obsession with the long term. But at the same time, he's very unafraid to get involved in practicalities and details of a single delivery. So they have this requirement that they would have to be on a call center every quarter, month for a given number of hours. And he would be taking calls from customers that were complaining about something. And then one of the calls, a customer said, the package came very damaged. And even before Jeff had the time to find out about the package ID and the product, the call center person who was mentoring him whispered, I know this is very likely this particular product. And it turned out to be correct. So then Jeff implements this stop button, which the idea is from a Japanese car production technique, where when you discover a place in the production line where there is a consistent or a frequent error, you can stop the production, you can get the engineers right there and get it fixed at the source, right?
Yeah.
And I'm fascinated by this, dual leadership or this dual perspective, where on one hand, you have to think about the long-term scale, millions of users, millions of suppliers, platform that is flexible, etc. And then on the other hand, you still have to have your fingers on the pulse of the everyday business. And I think they are probably world leading in this ability to do both.
I would agree with that. And I think Jeff has an amazing vision, but he also has that ability to narrow in on what is most important. And some of that comes from leveraging technology and data to recognize where are problems going to be arising, using the analytics for predictivity, as well as being a very, very good empowerer. I mean, when you look at the way that Amazon is run today, it is very much run as many small businesses. Each division, each area, each department are 100% empowered to make the right decisions. And so he doesn't have to worry about what every aspect is doing. He can keep that helicopter view, zeroing in when there's a problem, but really allowing each and every organization to run as its own individual business. The two pizza rule, that you can't have more than the people that can eat two pizzas in a team, because they've all got to be able to work together without all this overlapping, getting permissions.
And they have, sometimes it's a 10 people group, sometimes it's a 5 people group. But the point is that sometimes they have 10 pizza teams solving a problem, but they have very defined, non-overlapping tasks. And I think in order for this delegation structure to work, you have to be very, very clear about the goals and about the driving rules of your company. And that's what they have been exceptionally good at capturing in these new principles of leadership that they have. And I really recommend the book, and I recommend actually all the books about Amazon that I've read, and biography of Jeff Bezos, because in many ways, now that I'm building Learn and trying to make it scale, I don't need to find out those principles from scratch. If I understand why they made them and how they work, I can apply them in my own company for the scaling purpose. And so I would really recommend people to read Working Backwards and try to understand this scaling for exponential growth in the long-term philosophy of Amazon. And sorry.
One thing I would add there that is very much part of Amazon and all of the companies in Silicon Valley viewpoint, and that is the OKR concept. Now, you start with a clear objective. It's critical that everyone knows what the ultimate goal is, but then you measure not what people have done, not the amount of hours, not the product, but you measure what are the key results? How far is this moving us on the needle towards that objective? Absolutely critical.
Cool. And we have 5 minutes left in this lecture, Jennifer. So let's talk about Adobe. Why do you like them?
Yeah, Adobe is a very different example because they were started about 32 years ago and started as a very traditional company building software, and kind of like Moore's Law, every 18 months, new software release. And that was partly because that's how long it took to develop software, how long it took to get the product out into the market, upgrades. But they recognized in the 2000s that there were a few things changing in the market. Very good at understanding their customers' perspective. People needed new features, new capabilities more quickly than every 18 months. And their customers really valued certain point features. Not everybody used everything in a bit of software, but only what they wanted when they wanted it. And so they started in the early 2000s to explore, how could we offer software as a service? Instead of selling the product, let's sell access to the product when you need it, where you need it. And so in 2009, during that financial crisis that caused people to rethink all purchasing power, they were in a very good position to say, great news, you no longer have to pay $3,000 for an upgraded software. You can pay $25 and get access to this feature for this month and continue if you want or not. So they shifted their model very quickly based upon customer understanding, based upon researching and exploring before they needed to make a change. And they leveraged very closely the analytics, customer behavior, what are people willing to pay for even in a recession, and built on that to get a really, really strong foundation from 2009 to 2013 of customers shifting from buying product to service and building a very predictable revenue stream. Now, they had the challenge, like a lot of companies today, of how do you go from a company that sold $3,000 of software to millions of people to suddenly selling $25 of software to hundreds of millions of people. Now, there's this business model transition and a lot of really good leadership techniques around how they made that transition, keeping their stakeholders from Wall Street to others content with the vision of really changing the model, predictive revenue, and growing a much stronger long-term customer base. A lot to learn from that story of transition, but truly a market changer in shifting the model from product to service based on value and customer experience.
Agreed. Super cool example. Jennifer, we are going to stop now. This is the end of our lecture number 2. And after a couple of minutes, we are meeting again for lecture number 3, which will be about what tools and tactics can people start applying in order to create exponential growth in their own business. Thank you.